Hey everybody out there, this is Seto and welcome to another History of Yu-Gi-Oh! Episode. Today we are going to be covering January 2003 to April 2003. There's a lot of powerful cards and cards that you guys probably know if you play GOAT control format or just know Yu-Gi-Oh! In general. Powerful cards are going to be coming out in this time frame. A lot of powerful cards. And you're also going to start to see the development of regionals happening a lot more. By August 2003, you're going to have a championship tournament for the Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship in North America. And you're going to start to see by the end of the year, regionals being played a lot more. People are going to start this year off thinking about playing competitively, thinking about trying to make their decks optimized, and by the end of the year you're going to have competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! In full swing. So it's going to change from casual, fun Yu-Gi-Oh! To let's take this thing seriously because there's tournaments on the line. So without further ado, we're going to get this month's video started off by talking about some Yu-Gi-Oh! Games that came out on the Game Boy Advance. If you remember that old system from Nintendo way back in the day. So one of them that had a very some impactful cards in it is Stairway to Destiny Duel, if I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. It came out on April 15th, 2003, so after the time frame we're talking about a little bit, but it had some very impactful cards come out of it. It had Sinister Serpent and Harpy's Feather Duster coming out as promo cards in it. And Konami, from what I can find out by doing research, in February, 2 months before this game even came out with these powerful cards, Harpy's Feather Duster and Sinister Serpent, in February, 2 months before, they hit these cards prematurely to one of on the limited list. So they hit them right to one of before they even got released 2 months in advance. Now, some people say the reason for this is because there was a mistranslation between Konami and their Upper Deck. There was some mistranslation about, oh, when are we going to get the ban list? When are we going to get the cards out? There was a mistiming or miscommunication, so this is why this happened. Especially, you'll see this happen at other times in the early Yu-Gi-Oh! Eras. The other thing we're going to talk about, is something called Dice Monsters, or Dungeon Dice. This game came out on February 11th, 2003, and I used to play this as a kid, and it was a pretty fun game to play. But one of my favorite ones came out in February as well. On February 16th, we had a great game that came out for the PlayStation 2, and that was called Duelist of the Roses. If you guys have not played this game is pretty cool. It's based on historical events that happened in England, and it takes the connotation with Yu-Gi-Oh! And Yugi and Seto Kaiba being the two houses of Orange, I believe it is, that were the Duelist of the Roses that's called in England. Forget me, I'm having a history, even though I love history, I'm having a little bit of blind spot on this, but I know it's, I believe this is what set up the Magna Carta for England, so the king wouldn't have absolute power, the Duelist of the Roses. Against, I believe they were called Cavaliers and Roundheads, and that's what was the name of the two factions. If I'm wrong on that, please forgive me. But yes, this game, in Yu-Gi-Oh! Terminology, it's not a card game per se, but it's more of like a strategy game, and that's why it's really fun to play. It's a different take on Yu-Gi-Oh!, which was really cool for back in the day. Now we're going to talk about on March 1st, 2003. Now on March 1st, 2003, we have the release of Labyrinth of Nightmare. So Labyrinth of Nightmare comes out on March 2003, and it has some very powerful cards, some cards that you guys probably know about. The one main chase card of the set, which power creeped every vanilla beat monster that came before it, is Gemini Elf, or the Gemini Elf Twins, as you guys probably know them. The Gemini Elf Twins came out in this set, and they power creeped everything else. They were a secret rare, and they were very sought after. This power creeped your mechanical chasers, it power creeped your 7-colored fishes, your battle oxes had already been power creeped, but every 1,800 beater or more became just not good. People still play Dark Elf because Dark Elf on its own in a 1-on-1 battle can get over Gemini Elf, but for a drawback, a card with no drawbacks with high attack, it set the standard as 1,900 attack being a standard beater. So that is something to take of note of. Some other cards that came out of this set were some very cards that I loved playing in different decks back in the day. I remember you have United We Stand that came out of this set. This was used in different plays and combos. One thing that people used to do back in the day is go Scapegoat, activate Scapegoat, equip it with United We Stand, and then you would have a huge Scapegoat on the field with a lot of attack power. So you had the Scapegoat, United We Stand combos. You had Last War from Another Planet come out in this set. You had Mask of Restrict come out. Magical Cylinder came out, which people debate if it was a good card or not. People played it back in the day because it was a Yu-Gi card, and it was a decent card in some burn decks back in the day. But once you activated one, people knew you probably had other ones. You also have Mage Power that came out of this set. You have Torrential Tribute. Though Torrential Tribute at the time, from what I'm reading and looking through deck profiles, was really not played all that much because spamming the board wasn't a thing. Back then, it's more slow and grindy, and I know Torrential Tribute recently came off like a couple months ago, off from 1 of to 3 of, but that's because that's a lot different from back then. Nowadays, because we spam the board so much, Torrential Tribute's a good card. Back then, it wasn't because people weren't spamming the board, and it was slow, and Dark Horde and Regeki were better cards. As Yu-Gi-Oh evolves, as spamming the board becomes more of a thing, Torrential becomes better as a card. So right now, it's a good card. Some people play it, but it's a sleeper card, pretty much. You have Destiny board and all its letters that say Final. In the OCG, it says Death. So if you didn't know that, the OCG translation was Death, but for over here, we got Final. We also have Dark Necroface, which people really sought after because it was a Bakura card. The artwork was cool, and people did play it in some Fiend-esque decks back in the day. You also have Fusion Gate that came out of this set. Infinity cards, which it would get limited and banned eventually, but at this point in time, it really wasn't used. It just meant that your hand was, you could draw as many cards as you wanted. There was really no broken-esque combos that much with it at this time. You also have the Masked Beast, which really wasn't used that lot, but it was a very high attack beat stick monster that was a ritual. You also have Jar of Greed that came out of this set, which was a trap card. It was used in Exodia decks back in the day. You have Mask of the Accursed, which was used sometimes. You also have Card of Safe Return, which, if you guys know the 5Ds era and how good this card is with zombies, you know how good this card was, how much draw power it gave to you. Mwah! But that's a ways down the road. But this card is still broken even in that era with all the different Reborn cards you have. You also have Royal Command, which was used against a certain tech card against some decks and things of that nature. Aqua Spirit, Mermail players, you know what this does. We used to do. Marie, the Fallen one, was used. Revival Jam came out in this set as well. We also have some other cards that came out, such as Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer, which has seen play throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history, be it spellbook format, be it 2004 Chaos because it prevented your opponent from banishing cards from their grave. Kaiku has seen play throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history in spellcaster-oriented decks. No different here. Kaiku was a super, and nobody really thought of it as a good card. It was a good card. People did play it, but you're going to really see this card take off at the end of 2003 into 2004 when Invasion of Chaos comes off. You also have BAZOO, the Soul Eater, that came out of this set. And two things of note, for Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer and BAZOO the Soul Eater, they had mistranslations. For Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer, its mistranslation was it stopped any cards from... It could banish any cards from the graveyard, which was interesting. It was a mistranslation. For BAZOO the Soul Eater, it said you could banish any cards from the graveyard instead of saying any monsters from the graveyard. So you could banish spells, traps, anything with BAZOO the Soul Eater. The original text was supposed to say just monsters, but there was a mistranslation, and people, when they first got their BAZOO the Soul Eaters, thought this card was broken, OP, oh my gosh, I can banish anything. BAZOO is really, really good. Even after the translation, it was still a good card, but it wasn't as good as its pre-translation when it said it can banish anything in the graveyard to gain attack. Yeah, that's kind of broken. You also have Jaugen the Spiritualist coming out of this set, which people used in spellbook format and throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history. You have the Dark Door coming out of this set. It was kind of a stun-esque card. Tornado Wall, Defusion, good cards. Tornado Wall was used in water decks, Defusion counter to different decks throughout the years. You have Fire Princess, if you guys know Fire Princess OTK or FTKs. You had Summoner of Illusions, which was used in some fun decks throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history. We also have Guardian Garuda, the Wind Spirit, which has been used as a tech card in certain decks. Miracle Dig as well has been used as a tech card in certain decks. You also have Amazon's Archer, which I think is still used in some OTKs, FTKs, and some decks out there, even to this day. But that's the main reason that card's known for. You have Zombora the Dark, which was a counter for people that wanted to spend money on Gemini Elves. Zombora the Dark was a 21 beater that was normal summonable, I believe. Well, not normal summonable, but you could get it on the field pretty easily. It was a common as well. So you summon, if they have a Gemini Elf, you can easily get around the Gemini Elf with Zombora. Even after Zombora's effect kicks in where he loses attack, he's going to be a 19 beater. So at worst case scenario, you can crash into that Gemini Elf. It was used widely by a lot of players that didn't have access to Gemini Elf. Just so you guys know that. And the last card we're going to talk about too is Naruto the Wicked, which was used in some different decks throughout the years. So guys, we're now going to be talking about some of the competitive play. How was competitive play developing in this era? So competitive play in Yu-Gi-Oh! At this time was really starting to be taken to its own. Towards the end of 2002, you started to see locals being developed playing Yu-Gi-Oh! On a consistent basis. And towards the end of December and January, from what I can find, you're starting to see regionals develop. There's not a lot of them from what I can tell by research. Regionals really don't become a major focus in Yu-Gi-Oh! Really, and like really defining until the later part of 2003. And by 2004, they are in full swing. But you're going to start to see regionals developed. And the one thing, if you've been paying attention to this series on the channel, you're going to really start to see now how these players from deck profiles that people played back then, that were topping locals and regionals back then, how their mindset is changing from more of a casual mindset to finding the next best tech card to gain a leg up on their opponent. This is something I've been noticing. I've just seen this wide explosion of just like diversity and people communicating back then by going through archives. Thanks to Pojo. If you guys don't know Pojo, they still have all their deck list stuff from back in 2002, 2003. But I'm looking at these deck lists and everything, and I'm just like, you're seeing these people talk about why they chose these certain cards, why I chose this over that, and vice versa. And you're starting to see a competitive mindset developed. They're thinking, okay, advantage, how to win. Not, I don't want to just play Blue Eyes White Dragon because it's, you know, my favorite card, but I want to play cards that help me win my way to victory, not just for fun all the time. And granted, that's cool, but you know, you're starting to see this split in the community starting to develop over time. So now we're going to talk about a couple of deck profiles that came from March 2003 and seeing what people were playing in that era of Yu-Gi-Oh! After Labyrinth of Nightmare came out. So let's go to the deck profiles, guys. Now we're going to talk about some historical decks from this time frame of March 2003. So without further ado, let's get started at looking at some beatdown decks. So we have 2 Summon Skull for this build, 1 Jinzo, 2 7-color fish, 3 Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer. You can start to see people are starting to shift. This is from early March, so he was probably still getting his cards. But this was a deck that topped out of locals, got first place. And you can start to see how he's changing, using more just vanilla beatdown to using monsters with effects for 18 beaters. But he said he was getting more cards in the process. But 3 Kaiku, 2 Harpy's Brother called Sky Scout, 1 Jinzo, 2 BAZOO the Soul Eater, 2 Magician of Faith, 1 Man-Eater Bug, 1 Sangant, and 1 Witch. Now, Witch was already at 1, Sangant was at 2, but back then, Sangant didn't have as many targets, especially like in a beatdown deck. I mean, there's not that many cards this card can search out. So he liked it as a 1-of, but not 2-of, which makes some logical sense back then. He had 1 Tornado Bird, which he said he liked as a tech card. This is kind of like a mini giant Trunade in monster form. Return 2 spell trap cards from the field to the respective owner's hands. So it's a flip effect. It was decent, and it was a way to get around Imperial Order, he said, which was kind of nice. 1 Cyber Jar and 1 Morphing Jar number 2. He said he liked it. I guess some people had their reasons. You also see 1 Swords of Arena Light, 1 Monster Reborn, Regeki, Heavy Storm. Even though Heavy Storm's at 2-of, it was easily negated, especially if you already had an Imperial Order out in the field. 1 Premature Burial, 1 Nobleman, 2 MST. The reason for this is you could chain MST to Imperial Order, which was nice. 2 Acts of Despair, 1 Pot of Greed, 1 Change of Heart, 1 Snatch and Steal, 1 Call of the Haunted, 1 Magic Jammer, 1 Mirror Force, 1 Imperial Order, so people are starting to use it more, and 2 trap hole. So this is kind of just like a beat down cheap strategy. He said his objective was to get monsters engraved, use BAZOO, the Soul Eater, and just go from there. So just a basic beat down strategy. And we're going to get more complicated in this video as we continue along with these 4 decks we're going to look at. So this is a different strategy of beatdown. You can see here he's starting to use like some light and darks, even though we don't have BLS out yet. But you're starting to see like they're starting to shy away from like Legend, Mystical Genie, and 7 Colored Fish. By the next set, you're going to see those cards be power creeped for cards that are 1,800 meters with effects, which you start to see this person do. So I was showing you that first deck. You can see a deck that's topping still, but it's transitioning slowly to using other monsters. So you're starting to see now in 2003, Legend, Mystical Genie, those monsters, the graves are being dug for them. They're no longer going to see play. So you see here, Double Summon Skull, Jinzo, 2 Hysteric Fairy, has a decent effect to gain back life points. 2 Kaiku. Kaiku is going to be, you're going to see Kaiku in decks for over a year from here on out. I'm just letting you guys know. 1 BAZOO the Soul Eater, 1 Witch of the Black Forest, 1 Devil Sangan. It has a lot more targets in this variation of the deck, you can see. 2 Wall of Illusion, 2 Cyberjar, 1 Mask of Restrict, 2 Man-Eater Bugs for spot removal. We're getting rid of Jinzo, Summon Skulls, whatever. 2 Magician of Faith, 1 Change of Heart, 1 Snatch and Steal, 1 Premature, 1 Monster Reborn, Dark Hole, Regeki, Giant Trunade, which is cool, but he also liked 1 Heavy Storm, Swords of Ravine Light, Graceful Charity, Pot of Greed, Imperial Order, Magic Cylinder. Just give me a second to tell you guys something. So I looked over a whole bunch of decks on Pojo from March 2003. I can't tell you how many top decks, like decks that won locals, or got 2nd place, or 3rd place, or 4th place, out of like 60-man locals. Everyone was running Magical Cylinder, it seemed like. Like every other deck I looked at had Magical Cylinder in the deck profile. And I'm just like, wow. So we look back at Magical Cylinder now being like, oh, this is such a bad card. It only does damage, doesn't stop, not a great card. Back then, this card was clutch. I'm just going to say that because the game's a lot slower. And plus, you don't have Sakuretsu armor yet out, do you? So, no. Sakuretsu armor is not out, thus Magical Cylinder is better. So, for this time frame, Magic Cylinder is a decent, good card, quote unquote. Call of the Haunted, Ceasefire, great card. Mirror Force, 7 Tools of the Bandit, Trap Holes, and Wabukus. So that's a standard, what I would say, like a beatdown deck from this March, this era of Yu-Gi-Oh! Looks like. That's a very good example from what I recall as well. Now we're going to look forward into the crystal ball of the future and talk about a deck that you're going to see in the first spoilers, the first Yu-Gi-Oh! WCQ. So the first World Championship qualifier, pretty much, for Yu-Gi-Oh!, which happens in August 2003, is won by a deck called Hand Control deck. Now, Hand Control was not. This is pretty much the last stage before its final form, with Yatagarasu, Rhoda, Warrior Returning Alive, Marauding Captain, Don Zaluk, eventually coming out. You're getting close to its final stages, but this is the mid stage. You saw what it did last year. It was in its infancy. Now it's starting to become more potent, and this is a perfect example of what that deck's going to look like in the future. But this is a hand control deck from March 2003 that won a 65-man locals, it said. So you have Jinzo, 2 Man-Eater Bugs, 2 Magician of Faith, 2 Goblin Attack Force. Guys, these cards this guy has are expensive as hell back then, so this guy had money. 1 Kaiku, 3 Gemini Elves. When I saw that, I was like, what? This card was expensive back then, and this guy had 3 of them. 3 Gemini Elves. Ridiculous. 2 Magical White Hats, 2 Mass Sorcerer, 1 Witch of the Black Forest, 1 Sangan, 1 Cyberjar, 1 Mage Power, 1 Unite We Stand, Regeki, Dark Holes, Swords, Pot of Greed, Premature Burial, Monster Reborn, Snatch and Steal, Change of Heart, and cards that were used to rip cards out of your opponent's hand, such as Confiscation, Delinquent Duo, Forceful Sentry.
So you can see what he's doing here. He's ripping cards out of your hand by clearing your board through different means. Poke, rip a card, also use a confiscation, delinquent, or forceful sentry, or I'm going to +1 by attacking with mass sorcerer. That's his, from what I can see, his analogy is. But like I said, this deck has not reached its final evolution stage yet. 2 Heavy Storm, 2 Noblemen of Crossout, Mirror Force, Call of the Haunted, Imperial Order, and 2 Trap Hole. He was also citing, he said, 2 MST, which was in his deck list. I just wanted to point that out. Even though he had a 50-card extra side deck, I was just showing you the 2 cards that stuck out for me. People messaging me on YouTube. The last card we have here, the last deck we're going to talk about, is a fun little deck that, remember I was talking about last year in 2002, Clown Control, where this is a Gravity Bind Clown Control deck, or a level 3 and lower deck that works around Gravity Bind. And I love this guy's concept and the thinking in his deck building. So if you think about it for a second, you're like, oh, I see how these cards are interacting, and oh, this makes sense now. So if you think about it for a bit, you understand why he was running said cards. So you see 2 Hot Abusa Knight, 2 white magical hats, 2 Sangan, 2 Dream Clown, 3 Nimble Momonga, which gives him life points to use with Solemn Judgment, Magician of Faith, Mask of Darkness, Penguin Soldier, because Penguin Soldier was broken back then. You could go, if you have Gravity Bind up, you set your Penguin Soldier activated. Bounce one of your opponent's cards. So if they had a Jinzo on the field, you go bounce the Jinzo, bounce Penguin Soldier back to your hand, reuse Penguin Soldier, reset it. So it's a reusable card. Kind of like Sinister Serpent, but not really, if you use it properly. 1 Cyber Jar, 1 Messenger of Peace, 1 Dark Hole, 1 Regeki, 1 Change of Heart, 1 Snatch and Steal, 1 Mage Power, 2 Acts of Despair, 2 Noblemen, Heavy Storm, Pot of Greed, Monster Reborn, Premature, and he's running 1 Scapegoat, which I thought was awesome. 3 Gravity Bind. Limit Level B is not out yet, so Gravity Bind is the only card you have. 2 Solemn Judgment, which is amazing. I mean, like I said, this was a low-key broken card if you were a good player. 1 Mirror Force, 1 Imperial Order, and finally 1 Call of the Haunted. So I hope you guys all enjoyed these historical decks, and we're going to head on to the next segment of the video.
Guys, I hope you guys all enjoyed looking at all those different decks that people were playing back in March 2003. If you've been paying attention to this series, especially in the fall of 2002 to December onwards, you've been just noticing slowly but surely, if you've been paying attention to people's deck profiles that I've been profiling on this series, how people are starting to develop more of a competitive mindset, especially when you look at these historical decks that I've been posting for you guys. People are starting to say, oh, well, this is a good card, or this is a good card. People are not just playing Blue Eyes and Dark Magician anymore, or just pure beatdown. They're starting to come up with different concepts, different ideas, thinking how to counter certain decks, like how do we counter beatdown. The reason for this happening is because the card pool is expanding. For the first year of Yu-Gi-Oh, you pretty much only had a couple of sets legal. You had Legend of Blue Eyes, Magic Rulers, Spell Rulers as it's now known, Metal Raiders, and Pharaonic Servant at the end of the year. You only had 4 main sets. That's not a lot of I mean, yes, that's a lot of cards, but you have to think there's only a couple of good cards, maybe 10 or 12 out of each set that are really, really impactful. As the card pool expands, more diversity, more thinking, how can we counter things? This makes things more things easier to counter. And you start to see beatdown start to patter out of the meta in 2003. And more of a deck being known as Hand Control, which will win the Worlds of that year in North America. You'll start to notice how that is taking over and being the more dominant deck of the era, I guess you could say. But now let's continue on with card releases and everything. So on March 29th, we had Tournament Pack Season 3 released. Now Tournament Pack Season 3 actually had a lot of good reprints in it, like Axe Raider, and just some other good cards in there, like Mechanical Chaser, I think, got a reprint as well. But the only real card that was like the chase card of the entire set was Needleworm, which was used in mill decks. Now, keep in mind, a lot of the mill cards, like Morphine Jar and all these other cards, they were very expensive for that time. I'm talking like, just for one of them cost $60, $70. And for a lot of people out there doing that time frame, in this era, that's a lot of money to shell out when you're having to shell out just other good staple cards. So people would play other decks beside mill, but if you had the cards, you probably played a mill deck of that variation, especially with Needleworm coming out. But that came out on March 29th. On March 30th, we actually had the Pegasus and Joey structure decks released to us over here in the TCG. Now, these structure decks had a lot of good reprints in them. And if you guys don't know what was in them, I've actually done a couple deck profiles on the channel. I will try to leave them down in the link in the description down below or the comment section, so you guys can go check those videos out to see historical deck profiles of them. Like, just, they're not unboxings, but you can see the deck profile of them, me going through the deck. But they actually had a lot of good staples in them, like really good staples, Sangan, Maha, Velo, and good things of that nature. But they also had some good reprints. The Joey structure deck came out with Penguin Soldier and Scapegoat. Now, Scapegoat wasn't really played at all right now. Scapegoat will not see play at all until Metamorphosis comes out. The card that I'm going to put on the screen right now. When that card comes out, Scapegoat will be played. For now, it's not played unless you are a Joey fan. But Penguin Soldier saw a lot of play, especially with Gravity Bind. One of the cool things you could do back in the day with Penguin Soldier is you set your Penguin Soldier, you protected it, you bounced one of your opponent's cards, and then you bounced Penguin Soldier back to your hand, and then you would reset the Penguin Soldier whenever you needed to get around a strong, powerful monster, like a tribute, like Jinzo. So it was an out to Jinzo, and especially in decks that use Limit Lever B and Gravity Bind more, people started teching this card because you could reuse it. For the Pegasus structure deck, you had a Relinquish reprint, which was really nice, but you also had Griffin Wing, which nobody played at all, I think. Like, that was a counter to Harpy's Feather Duster, and nobody played it. And we had Graceful Charity, which, that was a good card. And from what I can understand from looking through archives, upon the release of the structure decks, or a bit of time before that, Konami semi-limited Graceful Charity. Around the same time as they semi-limited earlier, like I was talking about, Harpy's Feather Duster and Sinister Serpent. They limited those. They semi-limited Graceful Charity. Graceful Charity was a great card. But we are now going to go on to the ban list, guys, so we're going to go now on to the next segment. We're now going to be talking about the April 1st, 2003 limited list. Yes, this list apparently came out on April 1st, 2003. Yes, so Konami does make April Fool's ban list, just to let you guys know, but this was actually a real ban list. So there wasn't that many changes necessarily that did happen. You had Sangan that went from semi-limited to limited status, so semi-limited to limited. Mage Power went from unlimited to limited. United We Stand went from unlimited to limited, so you really had a harder time making that Scapegoat, that United We Stand combo, because it was only legal for like a couple days. And then you also had Magic Cylinder, which went from unlimited to limited. And that's all the changes that happened, actually. Now, that's not to say that Konami wasn't prone to making another ban list only a couple of weeks down the road, which they did. In May 2003, which we'll talk about in next month's episode, they made another ban list. Literally 4 weeks later, they made another list. Konami at this time, you have to understand, was literally trying to make sure that the game was staying healthy and that it was still growing. They didn't want it to become stagnant for too long, really. You'll see later on that Konami eventually started making 6-month block periods, but at this time, Konami was sort of kind of doing what they've done recently over the last couple of years, where they're not saying when a ban list is necessarily coming. They're like, well, from what I can tell from people in their posts, they're like, well, we don't know when the ban list is really coming. It should be coming out around this time, and they'll let you know, oh, it's going to be coming out a month later. But you can see how, like, over the last 6 months, we had one in November, and then we had a ban list in December. Then we had one in April, and we're having one in May. You can just see, like, how, like, many ban lists are just coming at us, you know, like that. And people could say back then, they didn't call it emergency ban list, like I've said on previous videos, but they were really emergency ban lists. Konami and Upper Deck were getting these knee-jerk actions to hit cards to make sure the game did not become stale or stagnant. But that's all we're going to talk about for today's video, guys. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a thumbs up down below, and remember to subscribe to the channel for more awesome videos. Thank you guys all for your support, and if you would like to, feel free to support me support me on Patreon. My Patreon will be down in the description below as well. And even if you don't, thank you for the support, and thank you to my Patreons who have supported me and helped me be able to continue making videos for you guys, be it this video or any of my videos. So thank you to all my Patreons for your support. And I'll see you guys next time. And remember, guys, to take care, have fun dueling, good luck dueling, and I'll see all of you guys next time. Good luck dueling to all of you guys. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you in the next History of Yu-Gi-Oh! Episode.